Well, Netanyahu sure is on a rampage lately. As I discussed a couple days ago, Israel decided to go and bomb Iraq, which, is a U.S. ally, and one would think that if Israel wants to conduct bombings in Iraq, that they would have had to consult with the Iraqis about that and gotten their permission. But the Israelis decided to dispense with formalities in that case because they know they can. Iraq really can't do much to strike back against them, and the only thing that could really happen to Israel would be the Americans waving their fingers at them and saying, "Now, Israel, that's not very nice of you. Apologize to Mr. Iraq," which the Americans really haven't even gone that far. The attacks now have not stopped at Iraq's borders. Israel really has been hitting just about everybody around the Middle East who somewhat could be considered an enemy of Israel, namely all of the Shiite groups, pretty much. So Israel hit the Shiites in Iraq. I already discussed. They also bombed this week, I think, Hezbollah's offices in Beirut. Now, I know that folks outside of Lebanon and in the United States in particular, like to think of Hezbollah as just, any other Islamic terror group, like Al-Qaeda or something. But Hezbollah is not Al-Qaeda or ISIS. They're quite different. They're a political party that happens to have a paramilitary wing. So yes, they are, Muslims, and they've, I believe, committed terrorist attacks. I don't know much about the history of Lebanon, but I assume that that's true, is that they are terrorists. However, they are also a legitimate political party, a party that happens to be in the current governing coalition in Lebanon. So Israel bombing their facilities in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, to me, looks very close to an act of war. Because Israel, though not bombing, the official government offices of, the Lebanese government, they did attack facilities owned and operated by a political party that is not the governing party, but a governing party of Lebanon. So this is quite more significant than the Israelis just hitting some Shiite militias out in Anbar province in Iraq, that are far away from Baghdad and are somewhat, at least, there's a chain of plausible deniability that could separate the Iraqi government from those Shiite militiamen. But in this case, you can't separate, Hezbollah from the government of Lebanon. But the Israelis didn't stop there. There were still more attacks. Namely an attack in Syria that was launched against, we don't know for sure, but what the Israelis were calling an Iranian installation in Syria. They say that this Iranian installation was being used to plot and then carry out an attack on Israel that was going to come this week, on Thursday, I believe. Now, the Iranians are denying any of this. They're denying that they were going to carry out an attack on Israel, and they're also denying that there was any base that Israel hit. They're saying that, whatever you hit, they were Syrians and not Iranians. We didn't lose any men, but which, again, when it comes to the Middle East and this kind of stuff, you never know who you can trust and who's telling the truth. Israel may be right, Iran may be right, or they might both be lying to a certain extent. But what was so interesting about this case is that typically when Israel conducts military operations outside of Israel, you don't hear about it from the Israelis. You hear about it from third-party reporting or from newspapers in Israel, but the Israeli government never acknowledges that Israel conducts military operations outside of Israel. They only really like to talk about, the operations that they conduct in the West Bank or Gaza or some other place. They love saying about how they bombed Hamas or something like that. So this tells me that Netanyahu definitely is looking for a bit of a propaganda victory out of, bombing Iran makes him look very good and tough. So I can't see any other reason why Israel would break with their pretty long-established policy of not acknowledging, any strikes outside of Israel. And if you thought that was it, well, no, there was actually another attack. That was launched against in northern Lebanon, interestingly enough, so deep inside the country. This was not, along southern Lebanon and the border where, Israel and Hezbollah have been known to clash. No, this was way up in the north. Apparently there was some camp being operated by Palestinians outside of Israel and Palestine, and the Israelis decided to bomb that. And I don't have too many details on what exactly the base was doing. I assume they were training some kind of militants or something to presumably fight Israel at some point in the future. Now, I have to say that as someone who doesn't live in the Middle East, but who follows the news there somewhat closely, this seems like an extreme amount of action even for that region and even for, the IDF. Because, we're getting to the point to where they're not taking little pot shots at different countries. It seems to me like Netanyahu is waging an undeclared war against pretty much anyone who doesn't like Israel in the Middle East. Because any of these attacks that I've discussed, if they were launched, say, by, Mexico against the United States, any one of them would have been considered an act of war and would have sparked a very major conflict where both sides would have openly stated that they were at war. But here in this case, Israel and all these Shiite groups, plus the Palestinians, do not say that they're at war. There is no official declaration of war. Lebanon has not declared war on Israel after they, bombed the offices of a member of their governing coalition in the capital city. Syria has not declared war on Israel after Israel's many bombings in Syria, and Iraq has not declared war on Israel for bombing parts of Iraq. It really is strange to watch what looks like warfare being waged and seeing the news reports come out, but having it not called a war. And I can't really explain why, other folks are not calling this a war, other than perhaps there's a lack of ability to retaliate. I already said that was certainly the case with Iraq. Iraq could not retaliate against Israel. Syria certainly has their hands full with internal matters, and they probably don't have the manpower to strike back against Israel. But I can't really explain Lebanon because, to me, that seems like the clearest cut and dry case of a country that should be somewhat upset with what Israel has just done. And that takes me to what Netanyahu's possible motives could be, because, they better be pretty good considering that what his actions, to me, very easily could spark a major conflict that would be quite difficult for Israel to make its way through. I don't think anyone wants to go to a full-scale war with Hezbollah again, or with the Syrians, or with the Iranians. However, upon looking a little deeper into Israeli politics, that sort of warlike behavior is quite popular. I find that quite astounding. I guess it's I guess they have an attitude there that they really only have the option of fighting. That peace is not an option, and that the fight is really inevitable, and that you're better off making the first strike and getting things out of the way and trying to get in as much damage on your opponent as possible, because they're going to try and come kill you anyway at some point. I'm not an expert on Israeli politics, but that's the mindset as I've been able to gather. Kind of if we don't kill them first, they'll come kill us. And so because of that mindset, Israel tends to elect politicians who, have that tough guy persona, who say like, hey, I'm not afraid to hit the enemy. I'm not afraid. I'm going to protect you, that sort of thing. And in bombing all these different countries, it would seem that Netanyahu is projecting that very persona, as he always has so well for the decades that he's been in politics. People seem to be less concerned about Netanyahu starting a war than they are concerned that whoever's in charge will have the gumption to truly prosecute that war. They sort of feel, it would seem, that the war has already begun, that they are in a state of perpetual war. But of course it is a state of undeclared war. And so we'll have to stay tuned and see how this affects Netanyahu's polling in the next few weeks. The Israeli election is coming up, and I'm looking forward to going over the results with all of you. So if you found anything interesting in this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and perhaps giving it a share. And if you haven't already, click the subscribe button, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.